that they were just not lucky. They departed Missouri on the Oregon Trail in the spring of 1846, which they should have known. Every time I played Oregon Trail, I got dysentery and died.
Absolutely.
They should have stopped playing. But anyway. They were a group of American pioneers who migrated to California in a wagon train from the Midwest. Now, they were delayed by a multitude of mishaps. They spent the winter of 1846-47 snowbound in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Some of the migrants resorted to cannibalism to survive, eating the bodies of those who had succumbed to starvation, sickness, and extreme cold.
Now, see, that's kind of, like you said, that's just definitely a really big difference.
Well, yeah. Al Packer did what he did out of greed, at least. And I suspect, I have no proof of it, but I suspect that it may have been a situation where the people with him were like, you told us you were going to guide us through this, and you are messing up big time. And it started a fight, and that's what started everything else. Because people who need food are testy. I mean, hungry people are testy. And the more hungry they get, the more testy they are.
Yep.
So, and I'm willing to bet that caused the fight that led to Packer like, you know what? I'm taking all your stuff, and I'm eating what I can. I'm not going to starve to death. And, which is different than the Donner Party. The Donner Party was a bunch of people looking to make a better life for themselves.
Right.
So they were traveling to California, but they just ran into lots of things that slowed them down. And so when they got into the Sierra Nevada mountains, the snow had already hit. There were big snows. They couldn't move. They were frozen in place for the most part. And so they had to do the best they could.
Right.
And I don't envy them, but I don't judge them. I kind of feel about them the same way I feel about the people that they made the movie Alive about, that Brazilian soccer team or whatever that crashed in the Andes.
Yeah.
You okay, Krysta? You're looking... Is your stomach upset, or are you just... Well, we're almost done, so... Alright. Anyway. So, in the 1840s, basically the United States saw a dramatic increase of people traveling west to settle the West.
Yeah, absolutely. It was exciting and a chance for a new life and a better life and definitely better weather.
Yeah. I'm just saying, not too many people freeze to death in California. That's what I'm saying.
That's true.
But the country at that point was underdeveloped, and so a lot of people were just trying to go and make something. And that's what the Donner Party was. It was 500 wagons that left from Independence, by the way.
Well, of course, because Independence is the Santa Trail from jumping up.
And a group of 9 wagons containing 32 members of the Reed and Donner family and their employees left on May 12th. So that's
close
the Donner
to Lexi's birthday.
Yep.
Yep. Although Lexi wasn't born yet, or else she'd be in her hundreds easily.
Yeah.
So they struggled through the mountains. They struggled through the desert, and they were frozen in the mountains, and they had no choice but to make do as best they could.
Right. which is, again, way different than the other story.
Right. Also, at that point, people in California were expecting them. And so groups were sent to find them, which was, I guess, a more common thing than I was aware of. Because it seemed to me, if you were expecting a group, in California and they didn't show up, your option was to wait. Because, it's not like a car and it was an 18-hour drive or whatever. These people were being pulled by horses and wagons that were loaded down. In some cases, they got out and walked because they could walk faster.
Right.
So,
and anyone who's ever made that trip, and I have multiple times, knows that that's not for the faint of heart even nowadays. So having made that trek in a vehicle in current times, just the thought of trying to make that trek in a wagon without, electricity and roads and maps and Google
and hotels.
And hotels, absolutely.
We stayed in some nice hotels between there and
here. I've made that trip without hotels, obviously, but they are definitely make it much more agreeable.
So, the pass, which at that point was named something else, at this point is now called Donner Pass. Imagine, I have no clue why. Just like the lake was once known as Truckee Lake, now it's known as Donner Lake.
Yeah, maybe just some kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Respect. Pay respect to the people who lost their lives on the trip, kind of thing.
Right. Life was so bad there. The cabins were cramped and filthy. It snowed so much people were unable to go outdoors for days. Diet soon consisted of oxhide, strips of which were boiled to make what was referred to as a disagreeable glue-like jelly.
Ew.
Ox and horse bones were boiled repeatedly to make soup, and they became so brittle they would crumble upon chewing. Sometimes they were softened by being charred and eaten. Bit by bit, the Murphy children picked apart the oxhide rug that lay in front of their fireplace, roasted it in the fire, and ate it.
Ugh.
So, it was not a good situation. Right. And so when people started to pass, they didn't really have a choice.
Right. They were making everything count and trying to do anything that they could to survive.
Right. Now, of the 87 people who entered the Wasatch Mountains, only 48 survived. Only the Reed and Breen families have remained intact. Children of Jacob Donner, George Donner, and Franklin Graves were orphaned. William Eddy was alone. Most of the Murphy family had died. Only 3 mules reached California. Most of the Donner Party members' possessions were simply discarded.
Yeah, if you're just trying to live, you're not really worrying about things.
And then to add insult to injury, newspapers would hit up the survivors every so often to talk about their ordeal. And talk about what they had to go through. Specifically with as much of a concentration on cannibalism as the papers could get, because newspapers at that time were a lot different than they are today.
Yeah.
So it was not a good situation. And a lot of the women remarried fairly quickly, but you got to remember, and a lot of people are like, well, that's because they were involved in this cannibalism. No, they were women in the 1840s. I don't like it. I hope it never happens again, but women were a prized commodity in that world.
Yep.
And a single one, you didn't let her stay single long.
Yeah.
Plus, there were members of the party who lied. Like, at one point, one of the guys that survived told an interviewer that he had eaten a baby raw. And then later, like 10 years later, in a separate interview, he said that nobody had engaged in cannibalism. That they had either starved or eaten, these bone soups and various things, and that cannibalism was just an ugly rumor.
Yeah, I find that so hard to believe.
And that is the story of the Donner Party. Of the two, I definitely have more sympathy for the Donner Party.
Oh yeah,
Same.
Yeah, well, okay, but just to play a little devil's advocate here, because yes, definitely, the Donner Party is more of a sympathetic story, and it was people trying to, make a better life for themselves and move forward, and they got caught in some really bad situations, and people had to do what they had to do to survive. I will say on the other gentleman, I think that in today's day and age, there would be a lot of questions about his mental health, his mental ability, due to the fact that he had the epilepsy, and that a lot of times, even now with the medications and the things that we have, a lot of times can cause people to have, mental issues and issues keeping things straight as far as right from wrong. Then he also went through at least part of the Civil War, and I mean, we all know that there were people who had to eat, trash and rats and everything else because of issues that happened during the Civil War. I mean, that sounds like there was a lot going on in his life too. So I'm not sure where that puts him, but those are all things that in our day and age would be looked at least.
You know what? That's a good point. I didn't think about that. That's probably, but I'm going to minimize that a little bit, because he did not spend long with either of the groups he signed up with.
Yeah. Because
he was an epileptic. And
right.
they mustered him out, because they can't have a guy in battle having an epileptic fit. It's, he can't support his mates, right? And that's, so the esprit de corps will be affected. So, I don't know. I don't like it. I just.
Well, it's definitely. Yeah.
It's definitely. You're right. There is more to forgive it than I first thought. But yeah, it's. But yeah.
It's something you can't completely explain.
Yeah.
Well, it's something you can't even completely. You can't. She's right. You can't be too hard on Al Packer. It was a different time, a different place. He was an epileptic. He had certainly seen some of the Civil War, if only in training for it. And I don't know what training was like back then. Maybe it was like you get a uniform and we're going to train you on the road. Here we go. We're marching.
Yeah.
And which would mean basically he lived the life of a Civil War soldier up until he had his first